I think I'm just gonna say it. Skill inheritance sucks. Not the system itself, because, you know, you could give any skill, or I would say any skill, but sometimes they have certain restrictions for certain units for some reason that don't really make sense. No, I mean more in the sense of how it is currently. I don't think this is anything new in terms of discussion when it comes to this community, because, you know, oh, you know, maybe we should increase the amount of inheritable slots that we get. Yeah, I know, everyone said it, but now I'm gonna say it. So, yeah, skill inheritance. That was a thing right at the beginning of the game, and by beginning of the game, I mean it was something that came out maybe a month after. It's what made somebody like Hector and Reinhardt super good, and somebody like Takumi super bad, and we've never been the same since. Usually the hypest parts of that were always just the demotes that we got, because it was like, oh cool, we got Death Blow 3 on a Klein. You know, Klein's a really good fodder bot. It was pretty much just like that for a while. And then over the course of a period of maybe a year and a half, basically once we hit CYL2, that's when we started getting tier 4 skills. And these were relatively tame for the most part, at least starting out. Death Blow 4 was just 2 extra attack of initiating combat, so nothing too crazy at the time. But actually, no, I take that back. I think a lot of us were pretty much just like, oh my god, tier 4 skill? That's crazy. Still, even with that being the case, the amount of available options that we always had in the demote pool were never the greatest for the most part. A lot of the most noteworthy builds at the time were always just Fury Desperation builds because of how cheap and effective it was. But with the introduction of tier 4 skills, it really just built upon the foundation of skills that we already had in the game to begin with. And shortly after, they did also increase the amount of inheritance slots that we could get per inheritance, because at the time it was only 3. But now, because they introduced tier 4 skills, you can inherit up to 4 skills at once. And it has not changed for at least 5 years, which, you know what? Whatever. It wasn't the biggest deal, because a lot of the skills that we could get that were readily available at tier 4 had some tier 3 variants that we could always fodder off, but as the game continued on and on and on and on and on and on and on, that never really became the case. Even by today's standards, some skills are just incredibly rare for no reason. Even if they're available in the Sacred Seal slot, you can't really get them all too easily in the normal pool, and by normal pool, I mean the regular summoning pool with 3 and 4 stars that are also completely bloated, but I digress. The point being is that we didn't really start seeing the ramifications of these tier 4 additions until more units started coming with multiple tier 4 skills. And again, a lot of the tier 4 skills built upon the foundation of already pre-existing skills. From my memory, the earliest time we had a unit with 2 tier 4 skills was with Brave Lysithea, who had attack speed push 4 and hone speed 4. Even if the latter was incredibly niche and mediocre, that didn't change the fact that they were still tier 4 skills, multiple in fact, on a single unit. And the biggest appeal always came with the arena scoring, in my opinion, mainly because they were the only ones that allowed for 300 scoring C slots and A slots, and usually these were beneficial for units that had 300 SP B slots at the time, because before tier 4 B skills, that was pretty much the best way to score an arena. Regardless, these were usually locked to specific 5 stars that weren't exactly rare per se, but being a 5-star in and of itself wasn't always the best when it came to getting specific skills. And even though now we don't have tier 4 skill demotes, which I don't think is the biggest deal anyway, a lot of the older tier 4 skills that were once really expensive became really easy to get, especially through the code system, which is really nice. But Arena is now at a point where the scoring really doesn't matter as much, because A, we got duos, and B, scoring sucks ass. So eventually when tier 4 B skills started coming out, they were also incredibly mediocre at the time, because you were trying to get out maybe the middling amount of them. But over the course of, at the very least, a year, because I'm pretty sure this started right when the Thief banner was, and I don't remember exactly it was. It'll probably be on screen, and if it's not on screen, then you can blame me and yell at me in the comments. They started pumping these skills out, and over the course of, again, a year, we've been getting a lot of new fodder. But with the caveat that a lot of these new skills didn't necessarily build off of pre-existing ones that we had to begin with, and the ones that did were also not readily available for fodder. I think the first noticeable jump that came with foddering and inheriting skills came from the Halloween banner with Halloween Corrin, who had Dragon's Wrath, Finish, and Joint Drive Attack. That is a lot of fodder that you couldn't really get all in one go, because we didn't have any prerequisites, and if we did, they were very expensive, and even at the time, you couldn't get Attack Speed Finish, Wrath 4, and Joint Drive Attack all in one go, which, you know what? Whatever. If you're going for a specific skill anyway, at least one of them is clearly one of the better ones to have, and it's just how the game was. Whatever. Keep going. I wouldn't say any of these were super meta-defining skills, even though Finish was extremely, extremely good, it wasn't one of those skills, in my opinion, that was you either have it or you just lose so much stuff in the game or you can't function in the game as much. I don't think Finish ever really fell into that category. I think it was just one of the top echelon A skills that we had at the time and is still incredibly great even to this day. But when we get to stuff like Guidance and Gambit and all of those, that's when we have a bigger issue. Arcane Lift didn't exactly have the most notable fodder. Outside of the sword, of course, he had a Menace and Clash, which were still good skills, minus Menace, but even then the big draw was always just going to be the sword, because at the time it was one of the best inheritables that we had for any sort of sword in the game, and it was a very, very nice thing that just pull for, especially since it was a limited time pull. Yeah, Arcanes are limited, and I assume most of you know that if you're watching this, and if you don't, then hello, welcome to the game. The Arcanes were pretty much, oh, you get all these new weapons, and that's cool, and blah, 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 blah. I didn't see a big problem with that. Still don't really see a big problem with just the weapons per se. My problem now is that they're introducing skills that you can only get on that specific arcane. And in some cases, you have to choose between the weapon and the inheritable. Not always, but sometimes you may go up and get, I don't know, an Aether because you're one of the few people who use Beast Calves for some reason. And you can't grab both the arcane and the new tier 4 Beast skill that has no prerequisite anywhere at this time. You want the weapon and you want the beast slot, you have to pull for 2. And over the course of, I would say, the last book and currently this book, they've been ramping up in skill power creep more than anything. I think most units nowadays are more or less homogenized, minus the ones that have PRFs, but even the ones with newer PRFs just tend to have old weapons but new effects or more effects. But really, I think the biggest thing that came out of this year was skill power creep, especially with Guidance 4 being limited on an arcane and only just reran last month. Going into that for a second, Guidance 4, in my opinion, is basically the equivalent of Saviors when those first came out. They're basically going to become the only C slot you ever run on a flyer because of how prevalent they are in today's metagame. That being said, if you ever wanted one, you have to pull on a limited time event for a limited unit that just never shows up otherwise. Can't even get pity broken by it. And I know the odds of getting pity broken by a specific arcane isn't exactly the highest, but that would still be more than 0% as it currently stands. And while in Tana's case, you could still grab the bow and you could grab Unity and you could grab Guidance all in one go because a lot of those skills are readily available. Some of the newer arcanes, you just can't do that because of their skill accessibility. But also, this isn't just limited to the arcanes. I know I went on this whole tangent about arcanes, but a lot of the normal pool and limited time seasonals also suffer from this greatly. If you want to get a brand new tier 4 skill from the B slot while also sacking other potential fodder that you could have grabbed otherwise, aka let's start with Brave Robin, because that's the most notable one that came to mind. You can only grab one or the other. And I guess it does help in some scenarios when it comes to inheriting specific skills to specific archetypes that can only use 1 or 2 skills unless you're infantry, in which case you could use 100 billion skills. You can't grab Finish and you can't grab Gambit at the same time. Soren is thankfully a bit more forgiving, but Corrin isn't because she also came with a new tier 4 skill that it's a bit iffy in, but it's still brand new tier 4 skill if anybody wanted it for their dragons or they wanted it for their beasts or anything. Did you want attack speed prime and you also wanted to grab Oath? Can't do that. You need only attack speed prime, and you know, that would suck because that C slot also goes really well with the A slot. I could keep going on and on and on about examples, but I want to at least be fair and say that a lot of the new tier 4 skills that were introduced this year do have prerequisites that you can summon for on specific seasonal banners. Did you want to grab attack speed finish and physical no follow-up from an ascended fur? You gotta pull for a Rebecca, otherwise you gotta pull for 2 furs and then blah 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 blah. Did you want lull attack defense 4 and clash 4? Well, then you need to pull for a Flavia on the Bride banner that's already gone, and yada 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 yada. It just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. I think the biggest thing this year hasn't even been unit power creep, even though we have amazing units that came out this year. I think the biggest thing was skill power creep, because now if you really just want to invest into all your favorites, or even just in the meta, you have to constantly pull for the new skills. And I wouldn't say all of them are necessary, but I would say more often than not, a lot of the ones that you need to try and pull for are going to be a lot more meta prevalent, especially if you're trying to play in specific game modes like Aether Raids or even Summoner Duels, although most people don't like that mode, so you can ignore that one. But even if you just wanted to build your favorites, for example, you can't really get away with a budget set because a lot of the budget skills don't really compete with a lot of the tier 4 skills we have nowadays. Back when it first introduced, it was maybe like a couple extra stats. Now it's like a couple extra effects. It's a lot of power creep that we got through the years, and it's especially prevalent nowadays. I also don't think it helps that the arcanes are limited because we also don't don't know when they're coming back specifically. I know it's not exactly easy to summon for them if they're not on a banner, but they could always show up, and in my opinion, there's really no reason for them to be outside the normal pool, because I don't think any of them really break the game, and if they do, then, well, we have Lucia, and she probably breaks the game even more, so I don't really care what the argument is. And to be honest, I think the biggest thing to me is that if a lot of the prerequisites weren't on limited seasonal banners, then I really wouldn't have as much of a problem with these tier 4s, although I would prefer if they increase the amount we can inherit from 4 slots, preferably make it so, I don't know, we increase it from 4 to 4 per slot. I know that may sound like a lot, but do you think anybody's really going to complain if we got 4 per slot? You know what? Maybe somebody will. But if we're being realistic, I think the biggest thing could always just be, oh, increase it to 5 or 6. Because in a theoretical setting, if you are able to get 5 skills from one unit, you should be able to inherit most of the notable stuff that you want to get and not have to pull for X amount of units just to get one full kit, which is still kind of ridiculous. I think Aether was the biggest example of that. I meant to talk about this earlier, but I was also very much hoping they would increase it. They didn't increase it, and maybe this video will also age like milk. In a scenario where maybe you have attack speed finish 3 ready to go from a young Rebecca, you could grab Robin's entire kit and throw it on any other infantry, and while they will probably be worse than Robin, you're still able to do it. I think that's the fun of the game, being able to build your own units. And with the way skill power creep is going right now, especially with the introduction of new tier 4 skills, or just a new tree of skills that you can only get from one specific unit, and it goes up to tier 4, it's really, really brutal, especially when they put it on an arcane. And just like how everyone said this in the past and continue to probably say it, if they just increase it by 1 or 2, I don't think anyone's ever really going to complain. Now, if they start introducing 2 new tier 4 skills on a unit per batch, then I'd just give up.